This is Mark Mullinex, and welcome back to Power for the Peaceful, a podcast and class on Taoism. Today, verse 12 two paths you can go by.
When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. The sweet sound of the river as she moves over the stones. The same song that the blood in your body sings as it weaves around your bones. When you're listening, are you listening?
Prior to the advent of brain, there was no color and no sound in the universe, nor was there any flavor or aroma, and probably rather little sense, and no feeling or emotion. Before brains, the universe was also free of pain and anxiety. Roger Sperry, Evolution of the Human Brain.
Yes, there are two paths you can go by, but in the long run, there's still time to change the road you're on.
Welcome back to our Taoism class. Today's reader and question asker is Madison Thomas from Mars Hill University. We'll be your voices for this Taoist lesson on how to pay attention to the necessary while we try to navigate lives through what Tao Te Ching calls the 10,000 things. It does this by talking about 5 colors, 5 tones, and 5 flavors. And these represented to Lao Tzu the normal sensory experiences we have every day. But what do we do with these colors, tones, and flavors? 2 paths. 1, we can overload on them and drown in unbridled sensory experiences, searching for boredom relief. Or 2, we mindfully take them in and see or taste or feel the small miracles of paying attention to one thing at a time. Let's start with my translation of this verse 12. Focus on mindfulness. Mindlessly regarding the 5 customary colors leads to color blindness. Mindlessly hearing the 5 customary sounds muffles one's ability to listen. Mindlessly tasting the 5 customary tastes dulls the tongue. Excess wastes energy and yields only unnatural and dehumanizing things. Unguided by heart, mind, nature, mindless attention leads only to insane choices. Thus, only mindful needs, not mindless desires, guide the sage. Focused thus, one knows exactly when to let go and when to hold on. First, some particulars of this verse. We translators have been uncertain whether the 3 mentions of 5 refer to a literary device to indicate many, or whether 5 refers to an actual number corresponding to the 5 traditional elements in Chinese thought. Both could be true, but I choose the latter emphasis.
The author Red Pine explains the significance of the number 5 in today's verse. The early Chinese liked to divide everything into 5 basic states of existence. They distinguished things as made up of varying amounts of water, fire, wood, metal, and earth, and each of these came with its corresponding color: blue, red, black, white, and yellow. Its corresponding flavor: salty, bitter, sour, pungent, and sweet, and its corresponding tone: la, sol, mi, re, and do.
The Taoist worldview held that, when vocalized or chanted in mindful fashion, 5 sounds brought harmony and healing to the various organs of the body: the liver, heart, spleen, lung, and kidney. Likewise, when mindfully held in balance, the 5 colors, the 5 elements, or the 5 flavors, they all brought peace. However, and this is a big however, when we consume them without awareness, they collide with and kaleidoscope within our senses, and we become senselessly attached to them. We experience disharmony and illness from a failure of desire awareness and desire management. Now, from its origin, Taoism has distrusted the undisciplined senses. They cannot show true reality. And sense experience alone, without consciousness of knowing when enough is enough, cannot be trusted to fulfill us. You start overloading on sense experiences, and it is difficult to stop. Mindless experiences, driven by sensory pleasure, hides a life of dullness and boredom. So what's at stake? When we mindlessly seek out sensory experiences, they mutate into dead ends rather, in themselves. They do not only deceive us from living in the moment as we are meant to live, but even lower our capacities to live as we are meant to live. Science tells us these sensory inputs from eyes, ears, tongue, and touch are just blind electrical signals going off in a blind brain. But Lao Tzu already knew that something in our brains or spirits gets unbalanced when we assign excessive credence and authority to these blind signals. They take up too much space and energy within when we let them in without critical discrimination. And once they're inside, it's hard to part with them. They become precious to us.
When you're listening, when you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, when you're listening, are you listening?
Lao Tzu says that when we engage in mindless, heartless, and soulless intake of sensory experiences, we just don't know when to stop. Never stopping, not just our sensory equipment gets dulled, but our very spirits or souls dull and flatten out. For we have begun a path to becoming desensitized to the magic and the miracle already present in everything. This pursuit of sensory pleasures is bad desire management. It's like trying to pursue and then freeze temporary waves on the ocean. Impossible. For all that rises falls. What presents disappears. However, when we hold on and clutch and surround ourselves with wave like mindless stuff and power trips, all of them temporary, we tire ourselves out, start hosting within ourselves the illusory and the unnatural. And the result? I think we become less human. By giving time and mental space to illusions, we slowly kill our creativity, our souls, because our dominant desire is not freedom from, but enslavement to illusions. As fellow interpreter of Tao Te Ching, Ron Hogan says in his verse 12,
Desire messes with your heart. The world messes with your mind.
so there's a lot at stake in this verse. Just what will we do with our desires? Yes, there are two paths you can go by, holding on to desires or mindfully letting them go. Verse 12 emphasizes the importance of achieving a critical balance in our living and not drowning for desire in sensory experiences. It encourages us to focus, for when focused thus, one knows exactly when to let go and when to hold on. Let go of distractions, and then one may choose the path guided by inner wisdom and intuition.
When you're listening, when you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, when you're listening, are you listening?
Tao is the womb of every natural thing and every spontaneous process. It has no preferences, no desires in and of itself. So when we attach specialness to things or to people, not only do we lose awareness of other things or people, but we engage in a never ending series of entirely artificial illusions. So, Mark, what's so wrong with mindless thinking? Well, a chaotic mixture of colors, sounds, and tastes, especially if coupled with a mindless or customary and materially oriented life, it stands in the way of Tao awareness and inner clarity. Taoist virtue, as we saw in the previous verse 11, stems from simplicity and emptiness. Taoism distrusts the senses and the signaling they give to our ever imaginative, interpretive brains. Lao Tzu calls the flood of sensory signals distractions. This verse questions a life of distraction chasing, because implied here is that distractions prevent us from knowing the miraculous of every moment, everywhere, every situation. Do we really want to become so jaded that no miracle can ever punch a hole in our dream world and shock us into awareness of how the miraculous now and the wonders here and the amazing this is what we should be paying attention to?
All language can register is the slow return to the oblivion we call health, when imagination automatically recolors the landscape and habit blurs perception and language takes up its routine flourishes. Anne Carson, Autobiography of Red.
Here's my take on Lao Tzu's verse. When we willy-nilly allow sensory overload, somehow expecting such overload to enrich us, this actually impoverishes us. We get to the boring point where everything we see is already behind our eyes. Everything we hear is already behind our ears already. What we touch links up with well-worn and pre-existing neural pathways, itching for another dopamine hit. We're just making copies of copies of copies of sensory experiences, expecting nothing unusual, noteworthy, miraculous. Been there, done that, but we keep on doing it. What happens when we see, though, with fresh eyes, hear with virgin ears, think with a beginner's mind? Then we stop hallucinating our realities and we learn to pay attention, paying attention to the real, to the hurting world, to the injustices just outside our narrow views, paying attention to hurting people or traumatized creation needing compassion, because there is something at stake in this verse, just like there's something at stake in our universe. There are two paths you can go by. Lao Tzu requests that we mindfully examine whatever we call reality, or necessary, or certainty, to see if we're living in our private hallucinations or in reality itself.
When you're listening, when you're listening, are you listening?
How to think counterculturally, in touch with our depths. Verse 12 of Tao Te Ching encourages us to get unadjusted from being guided by our attention-distracting outer senses, so we may recalibrate our inner gyroscopes. Pleasure-seeking, we never know when enough is enough. Untrained and unbridled senses send us overloads of stimulation, and when we pay attention only to the pleasing of the outer, we will soon be ignoring and then ignorant of the beauty of what lies beyond the senses. This unbalanced habit will only make our minds mad and will infuriate our souls. Only mindful needs, not mindless desires, guide the sage. Focused thus, one knows exactly when to let go and when to hold on. You see, mindful needs happen in the moment, moment by moment. Simple. Mindless desires we try to cram in all the time, and unable to process them, we become anything but simple. Let's not scam ourselves by rushing around for life's richness of life, beauty, and meaning, but in the wrong ways, because only in the awareness of the present moment is there sanity. There, in the now and the here and the this of the present moment, is ordinary time and space, uncolonized by desires. Buddhists call this state nirvana. Only within ordinary time and space lie the only conditions for the wondrous, the jaw-dropping, the miraculous to happen. They're always happening, of course, but our attention to desires and wanting the world to go my way pretty much blocks my access to the miraculous. Tao calls us to sandpaper, quote unquote, our senses, like a safecracker sandpapers his fingertips to sharpen receptivity. How? Slow down. From 60 to 0, not 0 to 60. What happens when you slow down? Slow down your demands. What would a slow day look like? 0 miles per hour is a spiritual practice. For we're taught how to talk, but rarely how to listen. We're taught to see, but not to envision. We're taught to touch, but really to feel. Because the illusion of being in control on top of things gets dispelled at 0 miles per hour. At decibel level 0 miles per hour is a spiritual practice. Because at 0 miles an hour, you have unhindered freedom from fast moving chaos. And with practice, Tao can be seen despite the 10,000 sensory inputs all vying for our attention. Tao can be heard despite the 10,000 noisy noises knocking on our eardrums. Tao can be tasted, touched right here, right now. One can be one with the people or creation right beside you. And that's a sign of good hope. This second path is not easy. Critical thinking is hard, and it takes courage to listen, envision, and really feel. It's the courage of one person standing alone and thinking for themselves and opting for the unpopular, the uncomfortable path. But this is Lao Tzu's better of the two paths you can go by. When you slow down so you can see the entire creation as enchanted and miraculous, as full of jaw-dropping and wordless awe and wonder as possible, then you've chosen the better path. If we can let go of our stress and choose peace, our depression and stress will decrease. Taoism and its relatives in Eastern spiritual traditions teach us to live in the moment as observers, allowing things to come and to go like waves on a sea. Path 1 is to drown in the waves. Path 2 is to learn to surf the waves. Practice looking beyond the brief glimpses of the eyes, hearing beyond the range of our ears, feeling beyond the brief encounters of touch, tasting beyond our tongue's usual, normal powers. Otherwise, we lose touch with what really lies beyond them.
As Ellen Langer wrote, mindlessness is the application of yesterday's business to today's problems. Mindfulness is attunement to today's demands to avoid tomorrow's difficulties.
In conclusion, verse 12 teaches that one path of mindfulness and mindful needs is the right path. Mindfulness is the rebuilding of our original muscle memory of peace and harmony, building it back into our senses. Mindfulness recognizes unnatural and dehumanizing things and helps us to avoid them. Mindfulness guides our true nature to make sane choices. Only mindful needs, not mindless desires, guide the sage. Focused thus, one knows exactly when to let go and when to hold on. The good news is that a disciplined, mindful mind has power. Power for peace. A peaceful mind is a mind with free will to observe, free to practice attention to the present moment. I've said it several times, I repeat it here. We pretty much become what we practice. We have a choice to practice mindful attention or not use choice and get lost in the 10,000 things.
Yes, there are two paths you can go by, but in the long run, there's still time to change the road you're on. Led Zeppelin, Stairway to Heaven.
Homework. 2 sentences. Plan and then follow through upon a slow day. A day when one rests at 0 miles an hour. Madison has her question for us now.
Hi, Mark. My question today is, what do you think the root of anxiety is, and how do you think Taoism can help people overcome anxiety?
This question, Madison, is so awesome because it's so simple. Who has not had anxiety is not the question. The real question, Madison, is who's tired of anxiety? For anxiety can be caught and even become habitual when we have uninterrogated mental habits that let in anxiety. From this verse, anxiety comes when mindless desires or untrained thoughts about an unknown future start to dominate. Our desires should not be handed over to, or filtered through our never satisfied ego. This wastes energy and produces only unnatural and dehumanizing things, to quote this verse. Anxiety is an unnatural and dehumanizing state because unguided by heart, mind, nature, mindless attention leads only to insane choices. Many East Asian spiritual teachers remind us that we are not made for the insane, the unnatural, or the dehumanizing. There's only goodness and peace within us, and that naturally. Maybe we've just forgotten this. But so there's nothing more insane than we, in the privacy of our lives, imagining or hallucinating a future that we cannot really control. That's just madness. Not feeling in control, we become anxiety paralyzed by what could be. So the fruit of our undisciplined future imagination activities is paralysis or a stuckness in a certain narrative that is just so hard to shake. Taoist sages would remind you, Madison, of your original peace, original goodness, original spontaneity. Yes, we can and should plan for our futures, but with our heart minds leading the way. We can skip the anxiety part by reining in the ego. So maybe you could just remind yourself in the future, anxious moments, just be aware. Ask yourself, why am I anxious? Is there something I fear coming from an hallucinated future? And is that fear really justified? Just becoming aware of being anxious is often the very reminder we need to pull the plug on future anxiety daymares. As you become more successful in recognizing anxiety medicine, you'll start finding your own ways of withdrawing from these bad places, not only increasing in power, but also you'll feel more confident. By the way, Madison, the four spiritual paths a Taoist takes to respond to your question is to do the four anti-ego practices we've already mentioned. Practice silence, practice darkness, practice emptiness, practice doing not. These four practices will become the core of my bonus episode 2 in a few weeks. This podcast is an original labor of love, designed, written, and co-produced by many whose central idea is that Tao Te Ching is good news for today. Tao still speaks. Madison Thomas spoke our quotes this time. Audrey Davis is our artist. Molly Hartwell sings her song Put Your Roots Down, and Fortress Press holds the copyright for quotations from my Tao Te Ching translation. Thanks to you for your attendance in this class on Taoism. May all your days begin in peace and become wombs for radical hope.
When you're listening, are you listening?